He was 9 years old when he decided he would never be powerless again. By 14, he controlled the streets of Incheon without firing a single shot. This is the story of Kang Do-hyun, the boy who built an empire from nothing and had to decide whether to burn it down to save his soul. The rain never stopped in Incheon. At least, that's how Kang Do-hyun remembered it. He was 9 years old the first time he tasted blood in his mouth. Not from an accident. Not from a fall on the playground. From a fist, his father's fist, crashing into the side of his face with the casual brutality of a man swatting a fly. His mother stood in the doorway of their crumbling apartment, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes empty. She had stopped crying years ago. Tears were a luxury for people who still believed things could change. "Get up," his father slurred, the smell of soju radiating from him like heat from asphalt. "I said get up." Do-hyun pressed his small hand against the cold linoleum floor and pushed himself to his feet. He didn't cry. He had learned that crying only made it worse. Instead, he looked at his father with eyes that were far too old for a 9-year-old boy. Eyes that were already calculating, already remembering. One day, he thought, one day, you will be nothing, and I will be everything. His father stumbled backward, almost as if he had heard the thought. Then he laughed, a wet, broken sound, grabbed his jacket, and disappeared into the rain. Do-hyun stood there for a long time, blood dripping from his split lip onto the floor. His mother finally moved. She knelt beside him, pressed a damp cloth to his face, and whispered the same thing she always whispered. "Survive, Do-hyun. That's all we have to do. Survive." He looked at her. He loved her more than anything in the world. But even at 9, he knew she was wrong. Surviving wasn't enough. The neighborhood they lived in was called Songnam-dong, a maze of narrow alleys, rusted corrugated rooftops, and broken dreams stacked on top of each other like coffins. The men drank. The women endured. The children grew up fast or didn't grow up at all. Do-hyun's only friend was a boy named Park Young-soo, a skinny, loud-mouthed kid with a gap between his front teeth and a laugh that could be heard 3 blocks away. Jung-soo's father was dead. His mother worked at a fish market from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. He essentially raised himself, which meant he had the street smarts of someone 3 times his age and the moral compass of a stray cat. "You look like shit," Young-soo said when Do-hyun met him at their usual spot, a concrete ledge behind the abandoned textile factory. "Thanks. Your old man again?" Do-hyun didn't answer. He didn't need to. Young-soo pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket, stolen, obviously, and offered one to Do-hyun. Do-hyun took it. They sat in silence, 2 boys smoking cigarettes in the rain, watching the gray world move around them like a machine they hadn't been invited to operate. "I heard something," Young-soo said after a while. "You always hear something." "No, listen. Moon Tae-sik's crew is looking for runners." Do-hyun turned his head slowly. Moon Tae-sik. Everyone in Songnam-dong knew that name. He ran the local gambling dens, the loan sharking operations, the protection rackets. He wasn't the biggest fish in the ocean, not even close, but in this neighborhood, he was God. "Runners," Do-hyun repeated.
"Yeah."
"Deliver packages. Collect envelopes. Simple stuff. And the pay." Jung-soo's eyes lit up. 50,000 won a week. 50,000 won. To a 9-year-old boy whose mother made less than that in a month cleaning offices, it sounded like a fortune. "How old do you have to be?" Do-hyun asked. "They don't care about age. They care about speed and silence." Do-hyun took a long drag of his cigarette and watched the smoke disappear into the rain. "Set up a meeting," he said. Moon Tae-sik operated out of the back room of a noodle shop on the corner of 4th Street. The front of the shop was legitimate. An old woman named Grandma Choi served janchiguksu to construction workers and taxi drivers. But behind the beaded curtain, through a narrow hallway that smelled of mold and cigarette smoke, there was another world entirely. Do-hyun and Young-soo stood in that hallway, waiting. Do-hyun's heart was pounding, but his face was stone. He had already learned the most important lesson of his life. Never let them see what you feel. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. His name was Baek Sungjin, and he was Moon Tae-sik's right hand. These are the kids? Baek Sungjin looked at them the way a butcher looks at livestock. Assessing weight. Assessing value. Yes, Hyungnim. Young-soo said quickly, using the respectful term. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Baek Sungjin's eyes moved to Do-hyun. They stayed there. You're quiet, he said. Yes, Do-hyun replied. Why? Because I have nothing to say yet. Something flickered in Baek Sungjin's eyes. Interest, maybe. Or amusement. He stepped aside and jerked his head toward the door. Come in. The room was thick with smoke. Four men sat around a table playing wadu, slapping the cards down with sharp, practiced movements. In the corner, behind a desk cluttered with ledgers and cash, sat Moon Tae-sik. He was not what Do-hyun had expected. He was small, barely taller than Do-hyun's mother, with thin wireframe glasses and neatly combed hair. He looked like an accountant or a schoolteacher. But his eyes told a different story. They were black, flat, and absolutely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who had done terrible things and slept peacefully afterward. Sit, Moon Tae-sik said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Do-hyun and Young-soo sat on the floor in front of his desk. The wada game continued behind them, the slap of cards punctuating the silence. Moon Tae-sik studied them for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out 2 envelopes, and placed them on the desk. Deliver these. One goes to the barbershop on 7th Street. Ask for Uncle Han. The other goes to the parking garage behind Incheon Station. 3rd floor. Blue Hyundai Sonata. Put it under the windshield wiper. Yes, sir. Young-soo said immediately. Moon Tae-sik ignored him. He was looking at Do-hyun. What happens if someone stops you? He asked. No one will stop me, Do-hyun said. But if they do? I'll swallow the envelope before I hand it over. The room went quiet. Even the wada players stopped. Moon Tae-sik's lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. What's your name, boy? Kang Do-hyun. Moon Tae-sik nodded slowly. Kang Do-hyun. I'll remember that. For the next 4 years, Do-hyun ran packages. He ran them through monsoon rains and summer heat. He ran them through police checkpoints and rival territory. He never lost a package. He never opened one. He never asked what was inside. But he watched. He watched everything. He watched how Moon Tae-sik managed his money, 3 separate ledgers, each tracking different revenue streams. He watched how disputes were settled, sometimes with words, sometimes with baseball bats, sometimes with silence that was worse than both. He watched who was loyal and who was pretending. He watched who skimmed from the collections and who reported honestly. By the time he was 13, Do-hyun knew more about Moon Tae-sik's operation than most of his adult soldiers did. Young-soo, meanwhile, had found his own niche. He was a talker, a connector, a gatherer of information. He knew everyone in Incheon, the street vendors, the taxi drivers, the bar girls, the corrupt cops. He could find out anything about anyone within 24 hours. What Do-hyun observed silently, Young-soo discovered through an endless web of conversations, favors, and carefully cultivated friendships. Together, they were eyes and ears. The quiet blade and the loud shield. When Do-hyun turned 13, Moon Tae-sik called him into the back room, alone, for the first time. It was late, well past midnight. The noodle shop was closed. Grandma Choi was asleep upstairs. The only sound was the tick of a cheap clock on the wall and the distant wail of a ship's horn from the port. Sit down, Do-hyun. Do-hyun sat. Moon Tae-sik poured 2 cups of tea. He pushed one across the desk. The gesture was significant. He was treating Do-hyun as an equal, not a subordinate. Do-hyun understood this immediately. You've been with me for 4 years, Moon Tae-sik said. Yes. In that time, you've never stolen from me. You've never lied to me. You've never complained. No. Why? Do-hyun considered the question carefully. Because stealing would be stupid when I can earn more by being trusted. Lying would be pointless when the truth serves me better. And complaining is for people who don't intend to change their situation. Moon Tae-sik sipped his tea. The clock ticked. The ship's horn sounded again, closer now. I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone in this organization, Moon Tae-sik said. Not Baek Sung-jin. Not any of my captains. No one. Do Hyun waited. I'm dying. Liver cancer. The doctors give me 2 years, maybe 3. The words hung in the air like smoke. Do Hyun's expression didn't change. When I'm gone, Moon Tae-sik continued, there will be a war. Baek Sung-jin will try to take over, but he's a soldier, not a leader. He thinks with his fists. The operation will collapse within a year under his command. The Busan Syndicate will move in. Everything I've built will be absorbed. Unless? Do Hyun said. Moon Tae-sik smiled. It was the same faint, almost imperceptible smile he had shown 4 years ago. Unless someone smarter is ready to take over. I'm 13 years old. Napoleon conquered Italy at 26. Do you think the world cares about age? The world cares about power. About will. About intelligence. Moon Tae-sik leaned forward. I've watched you, Kang Do-hyun. You see what others miss. You think 3 moves ahead. You understand that this business isn't about violence, it's about systems. Networks. Leverage. Control. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents, financial records, property deeds, organizational charts, contact lists. Everything you need to understand how this operation works. Every supplier, every client, every politician on our payroll, every cop who takes our money. Study it. Memorize it. Then destroy it. Do Hyun stared at the folder. He understood what was being offered. Not just information. A kingdom. Why me? He asked. You have men who've been with you for decades. Because they are men who followed. Moon Tae-sik said simply. You are someone who will lead. Do Hyun picked up the folder. It was heavy in his hands. Heavy with secrets, with power, with a future that was nothing like the one he had been born into. I won't let it collapse, Do Hyun said. I know you won't. Moon Tae-sik refilled his tea. But understand this, the moment you accept that folder, your old life is over. You will never be normal. You will never be safe. You will carry the weight of every decision, every death, every betrayal. And you will carry it alone. Do Hyun thought of his mother's whisper, survive. That's all we have to do. He thought of his father's fist. He thought of the rain in Incheon that never stopped. I was never going to be normal, he said. Moon Tae-sik died 17 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He died quietly, in a hospital bed, with only Do Hyun at his side. His last words were, don't be sentimental. Sentiment is a luxury you can no longer afford. Do Hyun closed Moon Tae-sik's eyes, stood up, and walked out of the hospital. He was 14 years old. The war started within hours. As Moon Tae-sik had predicted, Baek Sung-jin declared himself the new boss. He called a meeting of all captains at the noodle shop. 7 men gathered around the table where Moon Tae-sik had once sat. Baek Sung-jin sat in Moon Tae-sik's chair, wearing Moon Tae-sik's authority like an ill-fitting suit. Things are going to change, Baek Sung-jin announced. We've been too cautious. Too conservative. The gambling dens need to expand. We need to move into narcotics. The Busan Syndicate is making millions off methamphetamine, and we're sitting here counting pennies from loan sharks. Some of the captains nodded. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Do Hyun stood in the corner of the room, invisible, as he had always been. Just a boy. Just a runner. No one paid attention to him. That was their first mistake. Over the next 6 weeks, Do Hyun executed a plan he had been designing since the day Moon Tae-sik gave him the folder. First, he contacted the 3 captains he knew were unhappy with Baek Sung-jin's leadership, men who valued stability over ambition, profit over ego. He met each of them privately, in different locations, at different times. He spoke calmly, clearly, with a maturity that stunned them. He laid out detailed financial projections showing that Baek Sung-jin's expansion into narcotics would attract police attention and trigger a territorial war with the Busan Syndicate that they couldn't win. He presented alternative strategies, legitimate business fronts, real estate investments, digital gambling platforms that would triple their revenue without increasing their risk. 3 captains. 3 meetings. Three men who suddenly saw something extraordinary in the quiet boy they had overlooked for years. Second, he used Jungsu's network to gather compromising information on Baek Sungjin. It wasn't difficult. Baek Sungjin was reckless. He cheated on his wife with a hostess bar girl who happened to be the younger sister of a rival gang's lieutenant. He skimmed money from collections and hid it in a safe in his apartment. He had beaten a debtor to death 6 months ago and disposed of the body in the harbor, but 3 dock workers had witnessed it. Do Hyun compiled this information meticulously, like a prosecutor building a case. He didn't need all of it. He just needed enough. Third, and this was the move that would define his reputation for decades to come, he visited Baek Sungjin directly. It was a December evening. Snow was falling over Incheon, softening the hard edges of the city. Do Hyun walked into Baek Sungjin's apartment building, past 2 guards who knew him as a harmless errand boy, and knocked on the door. Baek Sungjin opened it, a glass of whiskey in his hand, surprise on his scarred face. "What do you want, kid?" "5 minutes of your time, Hyungnim." Baek Sungjin let him in, more out of curiosity than respect. Do Hyun sat down across from him in the living room, declined the offer of a drink, and began to speak. He spoke for exactly 5 minutes. Not a second more. He told Baek Sungjin about the 3 captains who had already pledged loyalty to him. He told him about the dock workers who had seen the body. He told him about the hostess bar girl and her connection to the rival gang. He told him about the skimmed money and its exact location in the apartment, behind the panel in the bedroom closet. Baek Sungjin's face went through several colors.
Red, white, gray.
"You have 2 options," Do Hyun said, his voice steady, his hands folded in his lap. "Option 1. You accept a generous retirement package. 200 million won. Transferred to an account of your choosing. You leave Incheon. You go somewhere warm. You live comfortably. You never come back." "And option 2? Baek Sungjin's voice was barely a whisper. "There is no option 2. Option 1 is the only option that ends with you alive." The silence in the room was absolute. Snow fell outside the window. The whiskey in Baek Sungjin's glass trembled. Baek Sungjin was a violent man. A dangerous man. He had killed before. He could have easily snapped the neck of the 14-year-old boy sitting in front of him. But something in Do Hyun's eyes stopped him, a certainty, a completeness, a sense that every possible outcome had already been calculated and accounted for. "If you're thinking about hurting me," Do Hyun added quietly, "you should know that Jung-soo is currently outside this building with a phone. If I don't walk out within the next 8 minutes, the dock worker's testimony goes to the police. The photographs of you and the hostess girl go to her brother. And the location of your hidden money goes to the tax authority." Baek Sungjin set his glass down. His hand was shaking. "Moon Tae-sik chose you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Baek Sungjin stared at Do Hyun for a long, terrible moment. Then he laughed, a short, bitter, defeated sound. "You're 14 fucking years old. That's irrelevant." Baek Sungjin stood up. He walked to his bedroom. Do Hyun heard the closet open, heard the panel slide, heard the rustle of cash being removed. Baek Sungjin came back with a duffel bag. "I'll take the money," he said. "Wire transfer details will be sent to you tomorrow. You have 72 hours to leave the city." Baek Sungjin walked to the door and opened it. He looked back at Do Hyun one last time. "You know what Moon Tae-sik used to say about you?"
No.
"He said you were the most dangerous person he'd ever met." I thought he was joking. He shook his head. He wasn't. Baek Sungjin left Incheon the next day. He moved to Jeju Island. He opened a small restaurant. He never came back. Kang Do Hyun became the boss of the Songnam-dong organization at 14 years old. By the end of the year, every captain had sworn loyalty. By the end of the following year, the organization had expanded into 3 neighboring districts. He moved his mother out of the crumbling apartment and into a clean, safe house in Bupyeong. She asked no questions. She simply held his face in her hands, looked into his eyes, and said, "Are you eating enough?" He smiled. It was one of the last genuine smiles he would ever give. His father came looking for money, as Do Hyun had always known he would. He showed up at the new house, drunk, belligerent, demanding. Do-hyun met him at the door. He was still small for his age, still looked like a boy, but something in his presence made his father take an unconscious step backward. "You don't live here," Do-hyun said. "You don't come here. You don't contact her. If you do, I will find you, and I will break every bone in your body. Not because I'm angry, because it's efficient." His father stared at him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. He was found 3 months later in a gutter in Suwon, dead from alcohol poisoning. Do-hyun paid for the funeral. He did not attend. By the time Kang Do-hyun turned 20, the Songnam-dong organization no longer existed. In its place stood something far larger, far more sophisticated, and far more dangerous. He called it Jeonminpa, the Black Gate. The name was deliberate. A gate is not a weapon. It is a structure. It controls access. It determines who enters and who is kept out. It is both a barrier and an invitation. Do-hyun understood that true power wasn't about force, it was about architecture. About building systems so intricate, so deeply embedded in the fabric of society, that removing them would cause more damage than leaving them in place. The Jeonminpa had 3 divisions. The first was the traditional underworld operation: gambling, loan sharking, protection rackets, nightclub ownership. This was the foundation, the cash engine that funded everything else. Do-hyun modernized it ruthlessly. He replaced physical gambling dens with encrypted online platforms that operated through servers in Southeast Asia. He restructured the loan sharking business into a network of quasi-legitimate lending companies that operated in a legal gray area. He converted protection rackets into security consulting firms that provided actual services, making it nearly impossible for prosecutors to distinguish between legitimate business and organized crime. The second division was real estate and construction. This was Do-hyun's masterstroke. He recognized that South Korea's explosive economic growth, the construction boom, the apartment complexes rising like concrete forests across Seoul and its satellite cities, was the greatest money laundering opportunity in history. He established a web of construction companies, development firms, and property management agencies. Every building they erected washed millions of won through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. The third division was politics. Not the crude bribery that most gangs relied on, envelopes of cash stuffed into politicians' pockets. Do-hyun built relationships. He identified young, ambitious politicians at the local and district level, funded their campaigns, provided organizational support, and asked for nothing in return. Not immediately. He was patient. He understood that a favor given today is a debt collected tomorrow. Within 5 years, the Jeonminpa had connections in the National Assembly, the Ministry of Justice, and the Seoul Metropolitan Police. Not deep connections, not yet, but roots. Thin, delicate roots that would thicken over time. Young-soo became his underboss, his biduminim, as the organization called the position. Young-soo managed the day-to-day operations with a combination of charm, cunning, and occasional brutality that perfectly complemented Do-hyun's cold, strategic mind. "You think too much," Young-soo told him once, during a late-night drinking session in the private room of a Gangnam bar. "That's your strength and your weakness." "Thinking is never a weakness," Do-hyun replied. "It is when it stops you from enjoying what you've built. Look at us, Do-hyun. We were smoking stolen cigarettes behind a factory. Now we own the factory. We own the street the factory is on. We own the district the street is in." Young-soo poured him another drink. "When was the last time you laughed? Actually laughed?" Do-hyun stared at his glass. He couldn't remember. "That's what I thought," Young-soo said softly. Then he grinned his gap-toothed grin and raised his glass. "To us, brother. The kings of nothing who became the kings of everything." They drank. But Do-hyun didn't feel like a king. He felt like a machine. A perfectly designed, perfectly functioning machine that had forgotten it was once human. Her name was Yoon Se-rin. She was a prosecutor. They met in the most unlikely of ways, at a charity gala for underprivileged children in Incheon. Do-hyun attended these events regularly, not out of genuine philanthropic interest, though he donated generously, but because they were invaluable networking opportunities. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, they all congregated at these events, loosened by expensive wine and the warm glow of performative compassion. Siren was there because she was investigating the charity itself, suspecting it was being used as a money laundering front. She was right, though not in the way she suspected. The charity was legitimate. Its primary donor, however, was the Jiaminpa. Do-hyun noticed her the moment she walked in. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in a sharp, severe way that suggested she had no interest in being admired. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry. Minimal makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved through the room like a scalpel through silk, cutting through small talk with a directness that clearly made people uncomfortable. He watched her corner a district assemblyman and asked him, with a pleasant smile, why his campaign finance reports didn't match his declared income. The assemblyman turned pale and excused himself. Do-hyun smiled. A real smile. The first one in years. He approached her at the bar. She was drinking sparkling water. "You just terrified a politician," he said. "I'd buy you a drink, but I see you're already armed with water." She looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown, intelligent, and profoundly unimpressed. "Do I know you?" she asked.
No.
"Then why are you talking to me?" "Because you're the only interesting person in this room." Flattery is the weapon of people who have nothing genuine to offer. That's not flattery. It's observation. Everyone else here is performing. You're working. She studied him. He could feel her analyzing him, categorizing him, trying to place him in a framework she understood. "You're Kang Do-hyun," she said.
He was surprised.
He kept his face neutral, but he was surprised. He maintained an extremely low public profile. His name didn't appear on any corporate documents. Everything was layered through nominees and shell companies. "You know me? I know your name. It comes up in certain files." She took a sip of her water. Nothing concrete. Nothing provable. Just whispers. Ghost footprints. That sounds very poetic for a prosecutor. I'm a very poetic prosecutor. She set her glass down. You should know that I'm investigating financial irregularities connected to several construction companies in the Incheon region. I'm not going to tell you which ones. But if any of them happen to belong to you, I'd suggest getting very good lawyers. She said this with the same pleasant, matter-of-fact tone someone might use to recommend a restaurant. Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. An actual laugh. It sounded strange in his own ears, rusty and unfamiliar, like an engine turning over after years of disuse. "Thank you for the warning," he said. "It's not a warning. It's a professional courtesy." She picked up her clutch. "Good night, Mr. Kang." She left. Do-hyun stood at the bar, still smiling, and realized something alarming. He wanted to see her again. Over the following months, he found reasons to be in her orbit. Not obvious reasons. Do-hyun was incapable of being obvious. He attended legal conferences where she spoke. He made donations to causes she supported. He arranged to be at the same restaurants, the same events, the same spaces. Siren noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a prosecutor. Noticing things was literally her profession. "You're following me," she said one evening when they ended up at the same jazz bar in Itaewon. The coincidence was, at this point, mathematically absurd. "I prefer the term gravitating," Do-hyun said. "I prefer the term stalking." Would a stalker admit to it? A smart one would, to disarm the accusation. He sat down across from her uninvited. She didn't tell him to leave. "Let me be direct," he said. "Please. I want to have dinner with you. A real dinner. Not an engineered coincidence." "Why?" "Because you're the only person I've met in the last decade who doesn't want something from me." "How do you know I don't want something from you?" "Because if you did, you'd already have it. You're not the type to wait." She almost smiled. Almost.
"One dinner," she said.
"And you tell me the truth about what you do." The truth is complicated. The truth always is. That's what makes it the truth. They had dinner at a small, unremarkable restaurant in Bucheon, the kind of place with no sign on the door, 7 tables, and a chef who had been making the same 6 dishes for 40 years. Do-hyun chose it deliberately. No private rooms. No VIP treatment. No demonstration of wealth. Just good food and quiet conversation. And they talked. For 5 hours, they talked. He told her about Incheon, about his father, about his mother, about Moon Tae-sik and the folder and the noodle shop. He didn't tell her everything, he couldn't, and she knew he couldn't, but he told her enough. Enough for her to understand the shape of his life, if not every detail. She told him about her own life. Her father was a judge, strict, principled, incorruptible. Her mother was a professor of constitutional law. She had grown up in a household where justice wasn't an abstract concept but a daily practice, as routine and essential as breathing. "We're from different worlds," she said. "Different worlds that are closer than you think. Your father upholds the law. I operate around it. But we both understand it. We both respect the systems that hold society together. You exploit those systems. Sometimes. And sometimes your father's colleagues abuse them. The difference between us isn't morality, it's honesty. I've never pretended to be something I'm not." She looked at him for a long time. The candle on the table flickered between them, casting shifting shadows on her face. "You're dangerous," she said. "Yes. Not because of what you do, because of what you are. You make everything sound reasonable. You make darkness sound like a different shade of light." "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation."
She paused.
"I'll see you again." "Why?" "Because I want to understand how someone who came from what you came from became what you are. And because..." She hesitated, and for the first time, Do-hyun saw something vulnerable in her eyes. "Because I haven't been this interested in a conversation in years." Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, like two people navigating a minefield by candlelight. They were both aware of the impossibility of what they were building. She was a prosecutor. He was a crime lord. Their professional existences were fundamentally adversarial. But in the private spaces between their public selves, something real grew. Something neither of them had expected or entirely knew how to handle. Do-hyun discovered that Siren was funny, genuinely, wickedly funny in a way that cut through his carefully maintained composure. She had a talent for finding the absurdity in any situation, including their own. "If my office ever finds out I'm dating you," she told him one night, lying on the couch in his Hanam-dong penthouse, reading case files while he reviewed financial reports, "I'll be disbarred, publicly humiliated, and probably featured in a true crime documentary." Would it be a good documentary, at least? It would win awards. They'd get a beautiful actress to play me. And some unknown to play you, because no one would believe a real actor could be this emotionally constipated. He threw a pillow at her. She caught it without looking up from her files. But the humor was a shield for a deeper truth they both understood. This could not last. Not like this. Something would have to give. The war came, as wars always do, from an unexpected direction. It didn't come from the police. It didn't come from rival gangs. It came from within. His name was Cho Min-hyuk. He was 32 years old, one of the Jeonminpa's most trusted captains, responsible for managing the organization's interests in the Gangnam Entertainment District, the nightclubs, the hostess bars, the karaoke rooms that generated an ocean of cash every night. Min-hyuk was everything Do-hyun was not. Loud, charismatic, flamboyant. He wore designer suits and drove imported cars. He surrounded himself with women and sycophants. He was popular with the soldiers because he was generous with bonuses and lenient with discipline. He was also, Do-hyun had begun to suspect, building an independent power base. The first signs were subtle. Min-hyuk started meeting with the Busan Syndicate's representatives without authorization. He opened a new nightclub, funded, ostensibly, with personal savings, that was suspiciously well-stocked with Busan-sourced liquor. He hired new security staff who weren't vetted through Jeonminpa channels. Young-soo confirmed it. "He's been talking to Kim Yong-chul," he told Do-hyun during a private meeting at 3 a.m. in the back of a car parked in a Udo parking structure. Kim Yong-chul was the boss of the Busan Syndicate, the Jeonminpa's most significant rival. "What's the offer?" Do-hyun asked. "Min-hyuk takes over the Jeonminpa's Seoul operations. The Busan Syndicate provides muscle and distribution networks. They split the profits 60-40, Busan's favor." Do-hyun was silent for a long time. "How many of our captains are with him?" 3 that I know of. Maybe more. He's been spending heavily, gifts, cash bonuses, favors. He's buying loyalty. Loyalty can't be bought. It can only be rented. Rented or bought, the effect is the same when it's pointed at your head. Do-hyun stared out the car window at the dark city. Seoul glittered below them like a circuit board, millions of lights pulsing with energy and ambition and desperation. Call a meeting, Do-hyun said. All captains. Friday night. The warehouse in Mapo. What's the plan? Do-hyun turned to look at his oldest friend. Young-soo saw something in his eyes that made his stomach turn cold. The plan is to remind everyone why they should be afraid. The warehouse in Mapo-gu was a cavernous concrete structure that the Jeonminpa used for storage, legitimate cargo mixed with contraband, impossible to distinguish without knowing exactly what to look for. It was cold inside, the kind of penetrating cold that seeped through clothing and settled in the bones. 12 men gathered under the harsh fluorescent lights. The 12 captains of the Jeonminpa, each responsible for a different territory or business sector. They stood or sat on crates, their breath visible in the frigid air. Do-hyun arrived last. He wore a simple black overcoat over a black turtleneck. No jewelry. No ostentation. He walked to the center of the warehouse and stood there, looking at each man in turn. Cho Min-hyuk stood near the back, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his handsome face. He was flanked by 2 of his personal bodyguards, men Do-hyun didn't recognize. Thank you for coming, Do-hyun said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if he were opening a quarterly business review. I'll be brief. I know about the Busan negotiations. The atmosphere in the warehouse changed instantly. The temperature, already cold, seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Men shifted uncomfortably. Eyes flickered toward Min-hyuk. Min-hyuk, to his credit, didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his smirk widening. Then you know it's time for a change, Min-hyuk said. No disrespect, Do-hyun, but, boss, Do-hyun corrected quietly. You address me as boss. Min-hyuk's smirk faltered slightly.
Fine, boss.
The organization has outgrown your leadership. We need alliances. We need expansion. The Busan Syndicate is offering us a leash, Do-hyun interrupted. They're offering you a leash wrapped in silk. You take their deal, and within 2 years, you're not a partner. You're an employee. Kim Yong-chul doesn't share power. He absorbs it. That's your opinion. That's a fact. Supported by the experiences of every organization that's ever allied with Busan. Ask the Daegu crew. Ask the Gwangju Federation. Ask anyone who's been foolish enough to believe Kim Yong-chul's promises. Min-hyuk's jaw tightened. And what's the alternative? We stay small? We stay in your shadow? You've been in charge for 6 years. And we're still operating the same way. No growth. No ambition. Our revenue has increased 400% in 6 years. Revenue isn't everything. In this business, revenue is the only thing. Everything else is ego. Min-hyuk turned to the other captains. Are you hearing this? He's calling ambition ego. He's a coward. He sits in his penthouse, counting money, while other organizations expand, evolve, dominate. We could be running Seoul, all of Seoul, and instead, we're playing it safe. Several captains looked conflicted. Do-hyun noted which ones. He filed each face away in his memory with photographic precision. I see, Do-hyun said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. Young-soo. The warehouse door opened. Young-soo walked in, followed by 8 men. Not Jeonminpa soldiers. These were men from the Seoul, a specialized unit that Do-hyun had created 3 years ago and that no one in the room, except Young-soo, knew existed. They were former military, former intelligence, former special operations. They answered only to Do-hyun. They were, in every meaningful sense, invisible. They spread out along the perimeter of the warehouse in a precise, choreographed formation that spoke of discipline and training far beyond anything a street gang could produce. Min-hyuk's bodyguards reached for their weapons. They never got there. 2 members of the Seoul materialized behind them, disarmed them, and forced them to their knees with a speed and efficiency that left the room stunned. Let me be clear, Do-hyun said, and for the first time, his voice carried an edge, a cold, surgical sharpness that cut through the warehouse air like a blade. I am not asking for loyalty. I am not negotiating for respect. These things are not given, they are earned, and I have earned them. Every system we operate, every profit we generate, every alliance we maintain, I built it. From nothing. From a crumbling apartment in Songnam-dong. He walked toward Minhyuk.
Slowly.
Each step echoing in the vast space. You think I'm a coward because I don't wave guns and make speeches. You think caution is weakness. You confuse patience with passivity. He stopped directly in front of Minhyuk. They were the same height. Their eyes met. I am not passive, Minhyuk. I am precise. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a slim folder. He opened it and held it up so Minhyuk could see. Inside were photographs. Minhyuk meeting with Kim Yongchul's lieutenant at a restaurant in Haeundae. Minhyuk accepting an envelope of cash. Minhyuk on the phone with numbers that trace back to Busan syndicate accounts. I've known about your betrayal for 4 months, Do Hyun said. I let it continue because I wanted to see who would follow you. Now I know. His eyes swept the room. 3 captains visibly paled. Captain Yoon, Captain Seo, Captain Huang. He named them without hesitation. You have a choice. The same choice I once offered Baek Sungjin.
Leave. Take nothing.
Start over somewhere far from here. Or stay, reaffirm your loyalty, and understand that this is the last chance you will ever receive. 2 of the 3 immediately dropped to their knees and bowed their heads. Captain Huang hesitated, then followed. Do Hyun turned back to Minhyuk. And you? Minhyuk's face was a mask of rage and humiliation. His eyes burned. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. You won't kill me, he said through gritted teeth. You don't have the stomach for it. You're right, Do Hyun said. I won't kill you. Death is too simple. Too quick. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Minhyuk could hear. I'm going to take everything you have. Your money. Your properties, your contacts, your reputation. I'm going to make you so irrelevant that even the Busan syndicate won't take your calls. You'll be a ghost. And ghosts, Minhyuk, are already dead. He stepped back. Escort him out. 2 Kyeolseonjo members took Minhyuk by the arms. He struggled briefly, uselessly, then went limp. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back over his shoulder. This isn't over, he snarled. Do Hyun didn't respond. He didn't need to. Within a month, every word Do Hyun had spoken came true. Minhyuk's assets were seized. His bank accounts were frozen through legal channels Do Hyun had carefully prepared. His contacts stopped answering. The Busan syndicate, seeing the swift and total destruction of their would-be ally, quietly withdrew their interest in Seoul. Minhyuk disappeared. Some said he went to Japan. Some said the Philippines. Some said he was dead. Do Hyun didn't care. Minhyuk was irrelevant. Just as he had promised, the Minhyuk affair consolidated Do Hyun's power absolutely. There were no more whispers of dissent, no more secret meetings, no more ambitious captains testing boundaries. The Jiaminpa operated with the ruthless efficiency of a Swiss watch, and Do Hyun was the mainspring. But power, like all things, had a price. The price was Siren. Her investigation into the Incheon construction companies had deepened. She was meticulous, relentless, and brilliant. She pulled at threads that other prosecutors wouldn't have noticed. Buried financial discrepancies, suspicious property transfers, patterns in corporate registrations that pointed to a single, invisible architect. She never found Do Hyun's name. His legal insulation was too thorough for that. But she came close. Dangerously close. Their relationship, already impossible, became a live wire. I found something today, she told him one night. They were in his penthouse. She was sitting on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs, eating tangerines. It was such a disarmingly normal image that Do Hyun sometimes had to remind himself of the surreal complexity of their situation. What did you find? A shell company, registered in Singapore. It owns 40% of a construction firm in Incheon. The construction firm built 3 apartment complexes that were funded by a development loan from a bank that has Let's call it informal connections to entities I can't yet identify. She peeled another tangerine. Her tone was casual. Her eyes were not. The shell company's nominee director is a 73-year-old woman living in a nursing home in Busan who has no idea her name is on corporate documents in 3 countries. She ate a segment. It's quite elegant, actually. The legal architecture. Whoever designed it is exceptionally intelligent. Do Hyun said nothing. It's you, isn't it? Siren said quietly. No accusation. No anger. Just a simple, devastating question. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Do Hyun had ever heard. If I answer that question, he said carefully, I put you in an impossible position. I'm already in an impossible position. I'm sleeping with a man I might have to prosecute. That's beyond impossible. That's Greek tragedy. Then don't prosecute. Don't be insulting. Her voice sharpened. You know who I am. You knew who I was when you gravitated toward me. I will not compromise my integrity. Not for you. Not for anyone. I'm not asking you to compromise anything. Then what are you asking? He looked at her. In that moment, Kang Do Hyun, the man who had outmaneuvered killers and politicians and crime lords, the man who had never lost a negotiation, the man who controlled an empire worth billions, had no idea what to say. I'm asking for time, he finally said. Give me time. Time for what? To become someone who doesn't need to be afraid of your investigation. She stared at him. Then she set down the tangerine, slid off the counter, and walked to the window. Seoul spread out below them. Infinite and indifferent.
1 year, she said.
I'll slow the investigation. Not stop it. I can't stop it, and I wouldn't even if I could. But I'll slow it. 1 year. Do whatever you need to do. And after 1 year? She turned to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and seeing them, seeing Yoon Siren, the iron prosecutor, on the verge of crying, broke something inside Do Hyun that he didn't know still existed. After 1 year, I do my job, and you face whatever comes. He crossed the room and took her hands. They were cold. They were always cold. 1 year, he said. 1 year. 12 months. 365 days to do the impossible. Transform an organized crime empire into a legitimate business conglomerate without destroying either the organization or the people who depended on it. Do Hyun had been planning this for years. Not the timetable, but the concept. He had always known that the endgame of the Jiaminpa was an eternal criminal enterprise. That was unsustainable. Every crime organization in history eventually collapsed, destroyed by law enforcement, internal conflict, or simple entropy. The smart play was to transition, to evolve, to shed the criminal skin, and emerge as something legitimate. Something permanent. He called it Huksu Jianwan, the black water transition. The metaphor was deliberate. Black water becomes clear when it passes through enough filters. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Separation. Do Hyun needed to cleanly separate the Jiaminpa's legitimate businesses from its criminal operations. This meant restructuring the corporate architecture, creating genuine, independently viable companies that could survive without underworld funding. The construction firms, the real estate holdings, the security companies, each one had to become authentically profitable. Phase 2. Dissolution. The criminal operations, gambling, loan sharking, protection, had to be shut down. Not overnight, but systematically over months. Revenue streams had to be replaced, not simply eliminated. Soldiers who depended on those operations for income had to be transitioned into legitimate employment. Phase 3. Insulation. Do Hyun himself had to become untouchable. Every connection between him and the organization's criminal past had to be erased, buried, or rendered legally ambiguous. This was the most difficult phase. You cannot unlive a life. He began immediately. The legitimate businesses were restructured under a new holding company called Geomun Group. Do Hyun hired a team of corporate lawyers, accountants, and business consultants, all legitimate, all unaware of the company's origins. He brought in professional management, established genuine corporate governance, and subjected the companies to voluntary audits. The gambling operations were the easiest to close. The encrypted platforms were shut down in sequence, their servers wiped, their user databases destroyed. The loan sharking was converted entirely into licensed lending. Higher overhead, lower margins, but legal. The protection rackets were dissolved. The clients were offered transition to legitimate security contracts or released entirely. The hardest part was the people. The Jiaminpa employed, directly or indirectly, over 300 people. Many of them had no skills, no education, no prospects outside the organization. Do Hyan set up a training program, construction, security, logistics, IT, and offered every soldier a path to legitimate employment within the Geomun Group. Those who accepted received a transition salary. Those who refused received a severance payment and were wished well. Most accepted. Some refused. A few caused problems. One of them was Captain Yoon, one of the three who had initially sided with Minhyuk. He had survived the purge, reaffirmed his loyalty, and served faithfully for the past 2 years. But the dissolution of the criminal operations threatened his livelihood and, more importantly, his identity. He was a gangster. He had been a gangster his entire adult life. The idea of becoming a security consultant or a logistics coordinator was, to him, a kind of death. "You're destroying everything we built," Yoon told Do Hyan during a heated meeting. "We're the Jiaminpa. We're feared. We're respected. And you want to turn us into office workers?" "I want to turn us into something that survives," Do Hyan replied. "Fear doesn't last. Respect doesn't pay pensions. Money does. Stability does. Legitimacy does. Legitimacy is a cage. And prison isn't." Yoon left the meeting angry. 2 days later, Young-soo reported that Yoon was reaching out to former Jiaminpa soldiers, trying to organize resistance to the transition. Do Hyan dealt with it swiftly. He called Yoon to a private meeting, presented him with evidence of his organizing activities, and offered him a simple choice: accept a generous retirement package and leave peacefully, or face prosecution using evidence the Jiaminpa had compiled during its operational years. Yoon chose retirement. He moved to Canada. He opened a Korean restaurant in Vancouver. By all accounts, he was miserable, but alive. 7 months into the transition, Cho Min-hyuk resurfaced. He hadn't gone to Japan or the Philippines. He had gone to China, specifically to Yenji, a city near the North Korean border with a large ethnic Korean population and deep connections to transnational criminal networks. He had spent 2 years rebuilding, networking, and accumulating resources. He came back to Seoul with backing from a Chinese-Korean crime syndicate called the Yonghungbang, along with a very specific agenda: the complete destruction of Do Hyan. The first sign was a fire. One of the Geomun Group's construction sites in Yongsan was set ablaze at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. No one was hurt, but the damage was extensive. Millions of won in equipment destroyed, a project delayed by months. The second sign was a murder. A mid-level manager at one of the Geomun Group's security companies was found dead in his apartment, strangled with a wire. A note was left on the body: "The Black Gate is burning." The third sign was the most devastating. A flash drive was delivered anonymously to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office. It contained financial records linking the Geomun Group's construction companies to money laundering activities conducted between 2008 and 2014. The records were authentic. They were from the old system, the criminal era accounting that Do Hyan had believed was completely destroyed. He had been wrong. Siren called him. Not on their private line. On his business phone. "The flash drive is on my supervisor's desk," she said. Her voice was professional, clipped, controlled. "I've been removed from any investigation related to the Geomun Group due to conflict of interest." "What conflict of interest?" "I disclosed our relationship this morning. To my supervisor." Voluntarily. Do Hyan closed his eyes. "Siren, don't. I did what I had to do. If I hadn't disclosed voluntarily and it came out later, I'd lose everything. My career, my license, my reputation. This way, I control the narrative." "What happens now?" "A special prosecutor will be assigned. They'll investigate the flash drive. If the records are authentic, and we both know they are, charges will be filed." "Against whom?" "Against the Geomun Group, initially. But they'll work their way up. They always do." "How much time do I have?"
"Weeks.
"Maybe a month." "Do Hyan." Her voice cracked. just slightly, like a hairline fracture in porcelain. Whatever you're going to do it now. Do-hyun called an emergency meeting with Young-soo at a safe house in Paju, near the DMZ. It was a farmhouse surrounded by fields, the kind of place where screams and secrets disappeared into the earth. Min-hyuk has the old ledgers, Do-hyun said, or copies of them. He must have taken them before we purged the system. Young-soo paced the room. That's impossible. We destroyed everything. I supervised it personally. Clearly, we missed something. Or someone made copies before the destruction. Who? That's the question, isn't it? They stared at each other. The implications were heavy. It was someone close, Do-hyun said quietly. Someone who had access to the financial systems during the transition. Someone who anticipated what we were doing and preserved leverage. Young-soo stopped pacing. A terrible thought crossed his face. Do-hyun, the only people with that level of access were you, me, and Chief Accountant Oh Jae-hwan. Oh Jae-hwan, 57 years old. Quiet, meticulous, unremarkable. He had managed the Jiminpa's finances for over a decade. He was so boring, so invisible, that Do-hyun had never considered him a threat. Another lesson learned. The most dangerous people are the ones you forget to watch. Within 24 hours, Jung-soo's network confirmed it. Oh Jae-hwan had been in contact with Min-hyuk for over a year. He had provided copies of the old financial records in exchange for a guaranteed position in Min-hyuk's new organization and a payment of 500 million won. Where is he now? Do-hyun asked. Jeju Island. He retired there 6 months ago. He thinks he's safe. Bring him to me. Oh Jae-hwan was brought to the Paju farmhouse at midnight. He was terrified, a small, gray-haired man in a cardigan, trembling in a wooden chair, surrounded by concrete walls and the smell of earth and diesel. Do-hyun sat across from him. Between them was a simple wooden table. On the table was a cup of tea. Drink, Do-hyun said. Please, I drink the tea, Jae-hwan. Oh Jae-hwan picked up the cup with shaking hands and drank. I know what you did, Do-hyun said. I know about Min-hyuk. I know about the ledgers. I know about the 500 million won. Oh Jae-hwan started to weep. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He threatened me. He said if I didn't, don't lie to me. You were never threatened. You saw an opportunity to profit from my transition plan. You assumed that once the Jiminpa went legitimate, you'd become irrelevant. So you created insurance. The weeping intensified. Here's what's going to happen, Do-hyun said. You're going to tell me exactly what information you gave Min-hyuk. Every document. Every number. Every file. You're going to tell me who else has copies. And you're going to help me neutralize the damage. And if I do, you live. You keep the money. I don't care about the money. You go back to Jeju. You tend your garden. You never speak of any of this again. And if I don't, Do-hyun said nothing. He simply looked at Oh Jae-hwan with those flat, dark, calculating eyes, the same eyes Moon Tae-sik had once possessed, and the old accountant understood. Oh Jae-hwan talked for 3 hours. He provided everything. The scope of the leak, the specific documents copied, the chain of transmission to Min-hyuk. When he was done, Do-hyun kept his word. Oh Jae-hwan was driven back to Jeju. He spent the rest of his life tending tomatoes and never spoke to anyone about the Jiminpa again. The information from Oh Jae-hwan gave Do-hyun a complete picture of the threat. Min-hyuk had copies of financial records from 2008 to 2014, damaging but not comprehensive. The flash drive sent to the prosecutors was the first wave. Min-hyuk was holding additional material in reserve, planning to release it strategically to maximize damage. He was also planning something more immediate, a direct assault on Do-hyun's inner circle. Intelligence suggested that Yongbang enforcers were already in Seoul, conducting surveillance on Geomun Group properties and key personnel, including Seorin. When Young-soo delivered this information, Do-hyun went very still. The kind of stillness that precedes earthquakes. How many enforcers? He asked. Our count says 12. Could be more. Where are they based? A commercial building in Gyeongdong. Min-hyuk's using it as a command center. And Min-hyuk himself? He's in Seoul, moving between safe houses. We haven't pinned down a pattern yet. Do Hyun stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the fields of Paiyu stretched toward the DMZ, where two Koreas stared at each other across a strip of earth that was simultaneously the most peaceful and most dangerous place on the planet. This ends now, Do Hyun said. Not next week. Not tomorrow.
Now.
He turned to Young-soo. Phase 1 Siren. I want 2 Seonjo operatives on her, at all times. She doesn't know. She can't know. If she finds out we're surveilling her, she'll refuse protection on principle.
Done.
Phase 2, the Gyeorodong building. I want it hit. Not destroyed. I want it emptied.
Cleared.
I want every piece of equipment, every document, every phone confiscated. And I want the enforcers detained.
Detained.
Not.
Detained.
We're not killing anyone, Young-soo. Those days are over. We're going to do this differently. Young-soo raised an eyebrow.
Differently how?
We're going to use the law. This was the most audacious gamble of Do Hyun's career. Instead of waging a shadow war against Minhyuk, the kind of war that would inevitably result in bloodshed, police attention, and the destruction of everything the Huksu Jianwan had accomplished, he chose to weaponize the very system that threatened him. He contacted a retired judge he had cultivated a relationship with years ago, not through bribery, but through genuine mentorship of young legal professionals. The judge connected him with the National Intelligence Service. Do Hyun offered the NIS everything they could want: detailed intelligence on the Yonghungbang's operations in South Korea, their connections to Chinese criminal networks, their personnel, their financial infrastructure. In exchange, he wanted 2 things. 1. The Yonghungbang's Seoul operation shut down permanently. 2. Cho Minhyuk arrested and prosecuted for his connections to foreign criminal organizations, arson, murder, and conspiracy. The NIS was skeptical. They didn't trust Kang Do Hyun. They knew exactly who he was, or at least who he had been. But the intelligence he offered was extraordinary. The Yonghungbang had been a thorn in South Korea's side for years, involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, and financial crime that crossed international borders. The NIS had been trying to penetrate their network for a decade without success. Do Hyun was offering them a gift-wrapped case. The deal was made. Not in writing, nothing this sensitive was ever written down. It was sealed with a handshake in a conference room at a hotel in Pangeo between Do Hyun and a senior NIS official whose name he would never learn and whose face he would never see again. The operation was executed simultaneously across 3 locations on a rainy Thursday at 4 a.m. The NIS and National Police raided the Gyeorodong building. 12 Yonghungbang enforcers were arrested. Weapons, communications equipment, and financial documents were seized. A second team raided Minhyuk's primary safe house in Songpagu. He wasn't there. He had moved to a backup location, but the evidence found at the safe house was extensive. Records of the arson, communications planning the murder of the security company manager, and detailed surveillance files on Geomun Group personnel. The third team, acting on intelligence Do Hyun provided through back channels, located Minhyuk at a villa in Gwacheon at 4:47 a.m. He was arrested while trying to flush documents down a toilet. He resisted. He was subdued. He was processed, photographed, and placed in a holding cell at the Seoul Central District Detention Center. Do Hyun watched none of this. He was at home, in his penthouse, sitting in the dark, drinking tea. Young-soo called at 5:30 a.m. It's done. Minhyuk. In custody. The NIS is already talking to the media. Expect headlines by noon. Casualties?
None.
1 officer bruised his knee. That's it. Do Hyun set down his tea. And the flash drive investigation? The special prosecutor is reviewing the context. With Minhyuk arrested and the Yonghungbang connection exposed, the flash drive is now part of a larger counterintelligence case. The Geomun Group's historical financial records are being treated as evidence of Minhyuk's extortion attempts, not as evidence of our operations. The narrative changed. Completely. We're not the criminals in this story. We're the victims. Do Hyun allowed himself a long, slow breath. Not relief. Relief was too simple a word. It was something more complex, more exhausted, more profound. It was the feeling of a man who has been holding up a building with his bare hands and has finally been allowed to set it down. Thank you, Young-soo. For what? For being here.
For all of it.
Since the factory. There was a pause on the line. When Young-soo spoke again, his voice was thick. Always, brother. Always. Cho Min-hyuk was convicted on 17 charges, including conspiracy, arson, accessory to murder, and violations of national security law. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. He would be 60 years old when he was released, assuming good behavior. He showed no good behavior. The Yongbang South Korean operations were dismantled. 7 additional arrests were made in Busan and Daejeon. The NIS published a carefully redacted report that made no mention of Kang Do-hyun or the Geomun Group. The special prosecutor investigating the flash drive quietly closed the case. The official reason was insufficient evidence of domestic criminal activity, superseded by national security investigation. The real reason was a conversation between the NIS and the prosecutor's office that no one would ever publicly acknowledge. Do-hyun was free. The Geomun Group was clean. The transition was complete. But he wasn't finished. He met Siren at their restaurant in Bukshan. The same small, unremarkable place with 7 tables and a chef who had been making the same 6 dishes for 40 years. She looked different, tired, thinner. The disclosure of their relationship had cost her, not her career, but her reputation within the office. She had been reassigned from major cases to administrative duties. Her colleagues treated her with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. She ordered the same thing she always ordered. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. The patterns of their relationship were so deeply established that they functioned like liturgy, sacred, automatic, comforting. The investigation is closed, she said. I heard. You had something to do with it. I had everything to do with it. But not in the way you might think. Tell me. He told her. Everything. The NIS deal. The Min-hyuk operation. The Huksu Jianwan. The transition. The years of planning. The systematic dismantling of the criminal empire he had built. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a long time.
You used the system, she said.
I used the system. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. There were compromises. Gray areas. Yes. But the outcome is legitimate? The Geomun Group is a legitimate business conglomerate. It employs 400 people. It pays taxes. It builds buildings. It provides security services. It is, by every legal and financial metric, a normal company. And you? I'm a businessman. Nothing more. She looked at him with those dark brown eyes that had never been impressed by anything. That's not entirely true, and we both know it.
No.
But it's true enough. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, as they always were. I'm transferring to the anti-corruption unit, she said. It's a lateral move, but it gets me out of the shadow of the disclosure. That's good. It also means I'll be investigating corporate corruption.
Ah.
If I ever find anything wrong with the Geomun Group, anything at all, I will prosecute. Without hesitation. I would expect nothing less. Good. She squeezed his hand. Now order me dessert. I've had the worst year of my career, and I want something with red bean. He laughed. That strange, rusty sound that she, and only she, could produce 0.5 years later. The Geomun Group was valued at 1.2 trillion won. It had expanded into logistics, technology, and renewable energy. It was listed on the Kosdaq. Its CEO, officially at least, was a former Samsung executive named Director Kwon, a perfectly legitimate businessman who had no idea about the company's origins and didn't ask questions about the quiet, intense man who served as chairman of the board. Do-hyun was 30 years old. He lived in the Hanam-dong penthouse with Siren, who had risen to deputy chief of the anti-corruption unit and was widely regarded as one of the most effective prosecutors in South Korea. They had argued about marriage. I'm not marrying a man with your past, she had said. My past is irrelevant. My present is impeccable. Your past is never irrelevant. It's embedded in everything you are. Then marry everything I am. She had thrown a tangerine at his head. He had caught it. She had tried not to smile and failed. They got married on a Tuesday at a courthouse with Young-soo as the witness. No ceremony, no guests, no flowers, just 2 signatures and a kiss that lasted longer than either of them expected. Young-soo cried. He denied it afterward, claiming allergies. Do-hyun's mother lived in a beautiful house in Pyeongchang-dong, surrounded by trees and silence. She was 62 years old and spent her days gardening, reading, and feeding a growing family of stray cats who had discovered that her porch was a reliable source of food and affection. She never asked about Do-hyun's work. She never asked about the money. She simply held his face in her hands every time he visited and asked, "Are you eating enough?" One afternoon, sitting in her garden while she pruned her roses, Do-hyun said, "Amma. I'm sorry." She stopped pruning. She looked at him. "For what?" "For everything. For the life I've lived. For the things I've done. For the danger I put you in. For the years of silence. She set down her pruning shears, walked over to him, and cupped his face in her soil-stained hands. "You survived," she said. "That's all I ever asked. You asked me to survive. I did more than survive."
Yes.
"You did." She smiled, a real, full, luminous smile. "And I am proud of you. Not for the money. Not for the power. For the boy who picked himself up off the floor every time his father knocked him down. For the boy who decided that the world owed him nothing and went out and built his own." She kissed his forehead. "Now come inside. I made jjigae." Young-soo remained Do-hyun's closest confidant, his unofficial consigliere, and the best man at his wedding, a fact he mentioned to literally everyone he met for the rest of his life. He ran the Jeomun Group's security division with the same combination of charm and cunning he had always possessed. He married a woman named Yoonji, a former bartender who was the only person alive who could consistently beat him at poker. They had twin daughters who called Do-hyun Uncle Robot because of his inability to express emotions around children. "You can run an empire, but you can't play peekaboo," Young-soo observed. "Peekaboo has no strategic value. It has immense strategic value. You're building loyalty with the next generation. These girls will grow up to be the most powerful women in Korea, and they'll remember that Uncle Robot couldn't make a funny face to save his life." Do-hyun tried to make a funny face. The twins screamed in terror. "Never do that again," Young-soo said on the anniversary of Moon Tae-sik's death. Every year, without fail, Do-hyun drove to a small cemetery in Incheon and sat beside his grave. He didn't bring flowers. Moon Tae-sik had hated flowers. He brought a cup of tea and a small ceramic cup for the grave. He poured both cups. He sat on the cold ground. He drank in silence.
Sometimes he talked.
Not about business. Not about strategy. About small things. About Siren's laugh. About Jungse's daughters. About his mother's cats. About the way Seoul looked from his penthouse window at 3 a.m. when the city finally stopped pretending and showed its true face, exhausted, beautiful, and stubbornly alive. "You were wrong about one thing," Do-hyun said on a particular visit. It was November. Snow was threatening. The wind carried the distant sound of ships. "You told me not to be sentimental. You said sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford."
He sipped his tea.
"Sentiment isn't a luxury. It's the whole point. Without it, we're just machines. Efficient, profitable, powerful machines. But machines." He looked at the gravestone. Simple, unadorned. Just a name and 2 dates. "I built what you asked me to build. I kept it from collapsing. I made it into something real. Something that will outlast me." The wind picked up. Snowflakes began to fall, catching the light from the setting sun, turning the cemetery into a field of small, cold stars. "But the best thing I built, the only thing that matters, is a life worth living." He finished his tea, poured the second cup onto the grave, and stood up. He walked back to his car. Siren was waiting in the passenger seat, reading a case file, eating a tangerine. "Done?" she asked without looking up. "Done."
"Good."
"Your mother called. She wants us for dinner. She made jjigae. She always makes jjigae." Because it's the only thing you eat without complaining. He started the car. The engine hummed. The snow fell. Seoul waited in the distance, glowing like a promise. Kang Do-hyun, the boy from Incheon, the runner, the king, the ghost, the chairman, the husband, drove toward the light. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look back. In this world, there are those who are born with power, those who seize power, and those who build it from nothing. The first are careless with it. The second are consumed by it. The third understand its true weight and carry it anyway. Drop your thoughts down there right now because your opinion genuinely matters and I read every single comment that comes through. And if you would follow Do-hyun into the Black Gate without asking a single question, type Black Gate in the comments so I can find my real ones. Do me one more favor and share this story with someone who needs it. If you know someone who loves Korean dramas, mafia epics, underdog stories, or characters so complex they feel completely real, send them this right now. Copy the link. Screenshot your favorite scene.
Tag them.
Do whatever it takes, because great stories deserve to be shared, and Do-hyun's story deserves to reach every person who would understand it. This story was written for everyone who has ever been knocked to the floor and chose to get back up. For everyone who was told they were nothing and decided to prove the world wrong. For everyone who knows that survival is just the beginning and that the real work starts after you've already escaped the worst. If that's you, and I believe it is, then this story belongs to you. So like it,
Comment on it.
subscribe for more of it, share it with someone who deserves it. And get ready, because the Black Gate is still open, and what's coming next will change everything. See you in the next chapter. Stay dangerous. Stay smart. Stay loyal. Black Heart. And if this story reaches 10,000 likes, book 2 drops early. No excuses. Do-hyun wouldn't make any.
Neither will I.